In today's video, we're taking a look ahead to the offseason and looking at some trade rumors involving teams like the Ducks, Jets, and Red Wings. They are all teams who are suspected to possibly be involved in some pretty significant trades. So we'll discuss what they may be up to. Plus, we have a lot of NHL prospects making their NHL debuts tonight, which is some big news for them. Plus, we have a lot of injury updates, including some key players, and we have the future of Ducks coach Dallas Eakins as well. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. First up, we just got word that there's an NHL game actually scheduled for tomorrow that's been postponed. Now, of course, we haven't had any postponements in quite some time, but since the NHL has kind of changed and updated and a lot of these players have moved past the COVID protocols, but this one's completely different. It's actually due to weather. The Seattle Kraken were scheduled to play the Jets in Winnipeg tomorrow, but apparently Winnipeg is expecting a major blizzard. So obviously in Canada, it's late April, well, I guess early April still, but you know, the weather can be unpredictable at times, especially in the prairies. So they're apparently expecting quite a storm. So, of course, the Jets were supposed to fly out after that game and head down to Florida. They have a Florida trip coming up right after, and that apparently would be in jeopardy as well if they tried to take the chance that the weather was okay to play. Then they definitely would make it out for that. So we could end up with more games postponed if that was the case. So at least they can leave a little bit ahead of schedule to beat the storm and get down to have their games in Florida. And apparently this game will be rescheduled for May the 1st. Now we know the Winnipeg Jets are mathematically at least still in the playoff hunt. If they win all of their games, plus have a little bit of help, there is a possibility they could squeak into the playoffs. Although I don't like the odds, and I think the math is certainly working against them. Plus, they're without Mark Scheifele. I'm not sure how long Blake Wheeler is going to be out as well. A couple of their top players, it's not going to be an easy task. They won their past few games against Ottawa and Montreal, but again, those are teams that are lower in the standings and teams that they probably should be beating anyways. But with all that said, they don't have the the firepower right now in the lineup to really take on too many more stronger teams. But their schedule is decent as far as who they have to play down the stretch here. But still, either way, that game could become very important, or it may not end up meaning anything. But of course, the Kraken being one of the weaker teams in the league, if the Jets manage to win all the other games and make it interesting, we could have a very meaningful game on May 1. Now, on to some injury updates here for today. We got word that a few players that are basically done for the season, which includes top defenseman for the LA Kings, Drew Doughty, which is a big blow for a team that's trying to get into the playoffs. And right now they have a spot, but it's slipping away ever so slightly every single day. Every game they play, they have not been playing well as of late. They are battered and bruised with lots of injuries. Some key guys, not only Doughty, but Dustin Brown and several other players too. And Doughty apparently was trying everything he could to come back and figure out a way to play, because he's one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. But, he had to have surgery on his wrist, and his season is unfortunately over. Well, that's a big blow to the Kings. Certainly they're going to have to persevere through this with other players, but they've had a lot of man games lost due to injury, especially in the back end. So we'll see where it goes. But between Vegas and Dallas and Nashville and the other teams like Winnipeg, we just talked about charging up, trying to grab spots, the Kings are vulnerable and are certainly not in a good spot. I don't like, between the schedule and the math and everything going against them, I do think there's a decent chance, unfortunately, that they fall out of it here and miss, but we'll see. They have to kind of have fate in their own hands, so to speak, if they can overcome this tough adversity situation they're facing. The Montreal Canadiens announced today that they also have a few players done for the year, including goalie Jake Allen, who we know had some sort of a leg or groin injury. They did confirm it was a groin injury today, and his season is over. Same goes for defenseman Justin Barron, except he has an ankle injury, which doesn't require surgery, but there's no point in rushing him back. Let him heal up. His season is over as well. Of course, we already talked a few days ago the fact that Jonathan Drouin, his season is also over due to a surgery that he had to have, and he's now officially on long-term injury reserve. The other guys could technically go there too if needed, but they have placed him on LTIR, which kind of leads us to think that there's maybe making room for Carey Price to get activated and get into a few games. And of course, we know Samuel Montembeault will probably be the main goalie, but Caden Primo, if need be, will get a game or two in there as well, depending on how long it takes before Price can play, since Allen is done. But there is cap space available for Price to be activated now. So I would think that there's a good chance that's coming soon. But that's just my opinion. That's not been confirmed by the team or any local media. Now, as I mentioned, we also have some other injury updates here for Vegas. And this is a big one. It's the return of Mark Stone. Now, I was trying to figure out earlier how in the heck Vegas was going to do this, because they were well short in their LTIR pool to activate Stone to have the space. They were like almost $5 million shy or something. It was a ridiculous amount because obviously Stone's making $9.5 million. They had like 5 point something available, but apparently they have moved other players to LTIR to create more space. So they have a growing list of players now on long-term injury reserve. At one point we had Eichel, we had Pacioretty, we had Stone, and even though those three guys are all going to be back now, they have a bigger list of players with smaller salaries. So we already had Riley Smith, Nicholas Hague, and Brett Howden on LTIR. And joining them today is forwards William Carrier, Nolan Patrick, and goalie Laurent Brossoit. So that's 6 players now on LTIR. That'll give them a pool of 9.8 or 9.9 million. And of course, Stone's making 9.5. So that gives them a bit of a buffer to activate Stone and have a little bit left over. Not much to really activate anybody else, mind you, but there is a small buffer there that they can work with should they, whenever they need to make their next move. So with Vegas here with, around 10 games or so left in the season, getting their captain back, if his back is good and healthy and ready to go, then I would suspect that they're probably going to be doing everything they can here, as we know, to get into playoffs. And right now, they've been playing well. They've been chasing down the Stars and the Predators and the Kings, trying to get in either a wild card spot or the number 3 spot in the Pacific, and that's only going to help their case. So we'll see where that goes on that front. Now, as I mentioned as well, we also have some pretty significant news. There's a lot of players, prospects, making their NHL debuts tonight. We have a couple of guys in Arizona. Obviously, Jack McBain and Nathan Smith, both going to be in the lineup to make their Coyotes debut. And certainly a little higher profile names in some bigger markets here. We have Owen Power, the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft, for the Buffalo Sabres. The big 6'6" defenseman, of course, came from Michigan to be finally signed with the Sabres a few days ago. He will make his debut tonight, and actually the game will already be going on before this hits YouTube against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And of course, number 10, Matty Beniers, also from Michigan, signing with the Kraken. And this might be one of the more important games in Kraken history. I know it's early, it's their first season. Obviously, their very first home game, they're all kind of, monumental nights. But this is their first ever pick, who was a high pick and, arguably the most prized possession of the franchise right now, given how young and new it is. Beniers could be a huge part of the future, and we'll get to see him make his NHL debut here this evening. So lots of players getting that done, and we certainly want to wish them luck and hope that we get a great start to these young careers. Now, jumping over to the Anaheim Ducks, Eric Stevens is reporting that they do have word that coach Dallas Eakins, who was entering the final year of his contract, will be returning to the Ducks behind a bench next season. Now, of course, apparently the way his contract was structured, technically he's in the final year of his deal, but there was a 1-year option for the club. So the club could elect to extend by 1 year rather than renegotiate a new contract. So they have, according to what Stevens is reporting, elected to do that, which means he'll be back. But of course, that will now be the full final year of that contract. If he's going to be back beyond that, then of course they will have to negotiate a new deal. And at this point, it's really hard to say. We talked a few weeks ago about the number of coaches around the NHL that are either on an interim basis and are not guaranteed full-time work next season, or that are in the final year of their contract expiring deals, and it's not quite clear if the team is going to renew them or if they're going to be looking for work elsewhere. Now, obviously, in the case of Eakins, I don't know how a lot of Ducks fans feel about that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a mix. Obviously, I know there are some that think he's doing a great job, but I've seen some not quite so sure. So either way, I think it's going to be a big year for Anaheim. Obviously, depending on how they do next year will be a big part of his future, whether or not he continues in that role with the Ducks or not. But sticking with the Ducks here, now most of today's trade rumors come from a combination of places, but the first little bit here comes from the 32 Thoughts podcast from Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick, and they talked about the Ducks and a lot in the podcast that came out yesterday, talking about the future of John Gibson. Now, of course, we saw the Ducks sell off a lot of veteran players at the deadline, and Pat Verbeek was made it clear when he first took that job as the new GM in Anaheim, replacing, of course, longtime GM Bob Murray, that he was not going to go past the deadline with all these key players unsigned. If they were not going to be signing, the pending UFA players would be traded, and he did it with every one of them, minus his captain, Ryan Getzlaf, who, of course, likely already informed the team that he would be retiring and didn't really want to move anyway. And, of course, he had, I'm not sure, I think he had trade protection in his contract. I'm not quite certain on that right off the top of my head, but either way, didn't matter. In that case, they would honor it because of the longevity and how long he's been there. But, Lindholm was traded, Raquel was traded, Manson was traded, Delorier was traded, and it's certainly, kind of handing things over to the younger kids like Zegras and Terry getting an even bigger role. Obviously, lots of other young players will be getting back into the swing of things next year. Mason McTavish will be a big part of things. They have lots of other young prospects. Jamie Drysdale. Will we see goalie Lucas Dostal get more opportunity? That's all kind of, a big part of the future. And when it comes to John Gibson, he's entering his later 20s now. He had signed a long-term contract. And Friedman and Merrick were talking about the fact that there was some rumblings that he may not be overly thrilled with the direction of the team and may want to move on because this isn't exactly what he signed up for when he inked that long-term contract. And essentially, they said by the trading, especially of Hampus Lindholm, that's kind of a signal to for Gibson to say, this is what I signed up for. And he's even though he hasn't, according to what they're saying, officially asked for a trade, it's believed at this point that he might kind of welcome it, and it wouldn't be surprising if we see the Ducks explore it this year. They did talk about the fact that Anaheim was heavily involved, of course, in the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. We know that. They're one of the teams that was constantly being brought up in the rumor mill as one of the more likely destinations for Jack Eichel. And according to what Friedman and Merrick were saying, that the Anaheim Ducks, if they were going to do that deal, it was very, very likely that they would have insisted on having Gibson in the deal. And I'm not sure how the Sabres felt about that. Clearly, they need goaltending help. They got, some other goaltending, prospects through trades this past offseason. Of course, they got Devin Levi and the Reinhart deal, etc. But, at the beginning of the year, they were scrambling for, a veteran, somebody who could actually play, which is why they brought in Anderson and Dell. And, of course, Dell didn't work out. Anderson got hurt and just been a merry-go-round there, goalies all year. But Gibson could have been a big part of that. Now, clearly, they like the Vegas package a lot better and certainly not something that actually took place. But it goes to show you that for the right deal, they were certainly willing to do it then. Another year has gone by. We have a new manager who's certainly taking the team in a slightly different direction. And you have to think that Gibson very well could move on. He's an excellent goaltender, considering what's been playing in front of him the last number of years. I mean, he's responsible for a large part of the team's victories. There's no doubt. And you have to think that he wants a chance to be on a more competitive team heading for the playoffs. So I would imagine that if they were already exploring the idea before, that the possibility of trading John Gibson is a real possibility this offseason. I mean, obviously, a couple of teams that kind of come to mind right off the bat. One would be Edmonton. Their goaltending situation right now has been stable between Koskinen and Smith, but we have to see how things go in the playoffs. Koskinen's contract is up anyway. They have Smith for one more year, but it's not a lot of money. They could even use him as a backup, perhaps. So it's still, they're going to need to figure something out with goaltending regardless next year. So certainly Gibson could work in that regard. Certainly other teams that are going to be looking to take a step up. You have to think even a team like Colorado. Are they going to re-sign Darcy Kemper? That's something that's going to be a big question for the Avs. We've seen based on moves by Sakic and the Avalanche, I'm not sure how much money they want to invest in goaltending. As much as they like Kemper, he's likely going to be doing a fairly big raise. This is going to be his one real good shot at cashing in on a longer-term, bigger money contract. And I don't know if the Avs are going to want to go there. And I'm saying that regardless of what happens in the playoffs. We've seen some, big moves. They lost Grubauer last year, and I wouldn't be shocked to see the same thing happen again. They might try to work out a deal to bring in somebody like Gibson. You just never know. I could see that being a possibility, and there are other teams too. So you have to think that a Gibson trade is certainly a possibility. Now, the other interesting part that I really found in this podcast, they get talking about the Red Wings. And of course, the Red Wings are a team that's been rebuilding, in their division right now. We have teams like Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, all kind of rebuilding right now. There's obviously the Sabres been doing it the longest. The Red Wings are the second longest. The Senators are coming up on them as well. And we've kind of seen this team like Detroit have a good start, but then take some major steps back in the second half of the year, which, a lot of us thought early on that maybe this Detroit team is really ready to take a big step forward and maybe compete for playoffs. But then they showed, no, we're not anywhere near ready. They really ran out of steam quick. And they have some tough decisions to make. They have guys like Tyler Bertuzzi and Dylan Larkin who are big parts of that team. And Larkin, of course, is the captain, their best player by far. And, they're going to need new contracts soon. And they're not old players by any means, but they're approaching, the latter part of the second half of the 20s, if you will. And, it's a situation with Yzerman and the Red Wings that they have to ask themselves, how far away are we from being competitive? And does it make sense to keep these guys in the fold? How old are they going to be when we're ready to win? And that's a big question managers need to ask themselves when they're managing their team and their assets like that. And it's a legit question. And I know Jeff Merrick said that he would really think that they would sign Larkin to an extension. And I would think that Larkin's going to be very much open to that, even if it means being patient with this rebuild. Same goes for Bertuzzi. They did make it known now, which is something that I kind of heard rumblings about a little bit, but didn't realize how serious it was. But last year at the trade deadline, the Maple Leafs' big target that they were trying to acquire was Tyler Bertuzzi. He was the main player they wanted to add, I guess, going into the playoffs at the deadline last year. And of course, it never worked out. And of course, this year wasn't really worth them revisiting because he's an unvaccinated player. Obviously, there's a lot of issues that way with where he can play, where he can't play. And it just really wasn't worth pursuing. But there was mention earlier in the season of some teams maybe showing interest in Tyler Bertuzzi, but I would imagine they were U.S.-based teams because that would make more sense. But at the same time, like I said, not that these guys are, they're not part of the problem. They're not necessarily, anything wrong. It just doesn't make sense to keep them, or do they get what they can and get big returns and continue building around the younger group of this players that are, like your Lucas Raymonds and your Mo Siders and your Joe Valinos and your Rasmussens and Zadinas and all those guys. I don't know. They do need some veterans around them. They do have some other guys that are there. But I think, to me, if Larkin and Bertuzzi are willing to sign fair extensions and be a part of that solution to help these young guys, to me, I think you might get that done. But at the same time, it's going to boil down to money. We know that Yzerman is not afraid to be very, make shrewd moves, and he'll do what's best for the team at the end of the day, regardless of how surprising it might be to some. So we'll see. But in your opinion, do the Red Wings try to get extensions done with these two players, or do they consider moving them because they might be a little bit too old and making too much money by the time they're ready to win? Now, lastly, I want to look at the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, we already talked about where they're at this year. They're going to have a very interesting offseason. There was multiple articles that I came across today. One's in the Winnipeg Free Press and one's in the Winnipeg Sun. The Winnipeg Free Press article by Mike McIntyre talks about the fact that they really have a lot of work to do. And the back end, the defense, is really a big part of the issue here. And certainly, even though they made some moves last year in the offseason, and I know in my opinion, and I thought they were going to be a lot better than what they are. They acquired Nate Schmidt. They got Brendan Dillon. And it just has not worked. I don't know what it is, but that just apparently it's just between the fit and the players. It's not working out. Pionk's not even having as good a year as he's capable of. Morrissey, of course, to me, like I said before, I really like Josh Morrissey. I just don't know that he's your number one defenseman. To me, you need at least one defenseman that's stronger than him. He's good, but to me, I don't know he's the number one. You know what I mean? So to me, they really do need to revamp that blue line, and it's not going to be easy. So they felt in the article that they have a lot of youth and between Heinola and Sandberg and a few others. Logan Stanley's worked his way into being a bigger part there. They certainly have a few answers within, but they're likely going to have to go shopping again and try to move a combination of between Dillon, Schmidt, and maybe even Pionk to bring in some other D to try to regroup and revamp that blue line yet again. Because it's by far the weakest part of that team. Hellebuck's a good goalie, but on some nights he's just not getting enough help and he's not having the greatest season. And I think a lot of that involves the defense. It's not to some degree on him, but when it comes to the forward group, they have some big question marks too. The article in the Winnipeg Sun talks a bit about the fact that they felt that Mark Scheifele's not really buying in to the systems and philosophies behind interim head coach Dave Lowry, and that obviously not sure if Lowry's going to be back. Will Kevin Cheveldayoff, the GM, even be back? You have to think there's question marks on him after all this time being the GM there and not really having that sustained level of high-level success. Is it time for a replacement? That's a real question I think that Jets ownership need to ask themselves. And with Mark Scheifele, as I've talked about before, like a lot of people feel that he's not asking for a trade, but he would welcome it to get a fresh start. But there is some talk of if Lowry doesn't stick around as coach and they bring in another coach to work with him that would be a better fit, would he be more interested in sticking around and being part of this? But clearly, Scheifele is going to be 29 years old. Wheeler's a few years older than him. As much as they're a really big part of the team and arguably the two top players, I mean, you got Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Is it time to make some trades here with these two guys and get some really significant returns to help out these other younger guys that are kind of the new core, if you will, and build around them? I mean, Kyle Connor's a solid 40-goal guy. Nick Ehlers can be a 30-plus goal guy, 70-point player when he's healthy. Dubois has proven to be a pretty solid center. I mean, Stastny might stick around. He's a little bit older, but a good veteran to help out. Hard to say what they do here, but I really think that they need to explore the possibility of trading Scheifele. I think a fresh start might be good for him. But then again, maybe a fresh coach and a few changes on the team might be what's needed as well. I mean, he's still very productive. Same with Wheeler. So you have to think that, they're not necessarily part of the problem. But is it time to move on and to get, a good return while you can and maybe continue to build around some other guys? I don't know. But certainly, when it comes to teams not succeeding and getting the level of success that they want, you always look to the coach and to the leadership on the team. We've already seen a coaching change, even though Maurice resigned. It still happened, didn't really get them anywhere. At this point, the GM's now looking at the players saying, okay, we have a new voice, we have a new coach. That didn't help. It's got to be the roster. So what changes are we going to make? And I think they're going to be a busy team, an interesting team, and I'll be curious to see what they do. Let me know what you think down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.